All right. This is Solo Podcast episode number 22, Synchronicities. I'm going to keep it real with you guys. I have absolutely no notes. I was supposed to film this podcast like 2 weeks ago, but luckily I'm very ahead so I can film it late. But it's not a good habit to do stuff late. But life has been crazy. I went on a spontaneous trip to New York City, and I have another spontaneous trip I'm going to talk about in my next solo podcast. And the theme of this podcast is synchronicities, which I guess I don't truly know the definition of synchronicities, but my understanding of it is that one thing happens in your life, and then like if you're paying attention, if you're letting God guide your life or whatever you believe in, if you're not so worried about the future, if you kind of go with the flow, then patterns of things will happen. And to me, I've had a lot of good synchronicities in my life. So I'm going to talk about some of those. The first being, when I started this podcast, I had a fear that I believed that you could not have a successful podcast unless you had already been successful in a different area. So maybe you were a huge stand-up comedian and then you started a podcast, or you're a huge YouTuber and then you started a podcast, or you're an actor and then you started a podcast. But that was back when I measured success by money, possessions, achievements, and for this sake, numbers. Now, I do not measure success that way. The message of the podcast, Soul Wealth, is I measure success by the quality of my relationships and the quality of my memories. And since that is my given measure of success, I am extremely successful. I can come to New York City, which is where I'm at right now, and I have a couch to stay for 2 weeks. I have a bed to stay for 2 weeks. People are taking off time of work to have dinner with me. People are making plans with me to go do this fun thing, to get lunch, to get dinner. And that, I know I'm successful because of that relationship metric, that I can just pop down in a new city and people are waiting to spend time with me. And that's the best feeling in the world. And on top of that, I've made bountiful memories in New York City, which making memories, I believe, is part of the equation to soul wealth. And one of the synchronicities I want to talk about is back when I had that belief about you had to be successful somewhere else to start a podcast. I was trying to find someone who made it as just a podcaster. I was like, is there anyone who didn't come from any other field who made it as just a podcaster? And I found this guy, Danny Miranda. He's about almost 400 podcasts in, and I looked up to him because he didn't really do anything before podcast. I'm sure he did, but he wasn't like some famous person who switched to having a podcast. And I remember he was a mutual friend with my friend Chris, who runs Creator Camp. And I was like, Chris, could you put me on the phone with this guy, Danny, so I could learn from him and I could be inspired by him succeeding with such little, with no success in any other field? And Chris was like, I will put you on the phone with Danny, but first you got to film 10 episodes. And I was like, done. So by the time I get to filming 10 episodes, I've read this book, The Creative Act by Rick Rubin. Sorry for the sneeze. God bless me. But I read this book, The Creative Act by Rick Rubin, and one of the things it says in the book is that most people, when they enter an industry, so if you are entering, you're trying to become a YouTuber, you're trying to become an actor. For me, in this example, I'm trying to become a podcaster. Most people, what they do is they look to successful people. So maybe I try to find Joe Rogan, I try to find Caller Daddy host, I forgot her name, and I try to look at Danny Miranda, and I'm looking at all these people who have succeeded, and I try to not necessarily copy them, but I try to get their best tips and tricks of how they succeeded, and I try to put their tips into my journey, and then through emulating my heroes in the industry, I create my own podcast. But Rick Rubin had mentioned in the book, a lot of the greatest innovations of all time came through ignorance. It came because someone tried to enter an industry that they knew nothing about, and then they accidentally innovated and pushed the industry along. So for example, I'll give you an example, like Elon Musk. Elon Musk didn't know anything about rockets. he made a bunch of money. He's a very smart engineer, but he didn't know anything about rockets. I don't even know if he's an engineer. But he entered the rocket industry, and he didn't accept the fact that rockets couldn't take off and then land. So most rocket tests, the rocket just blows up and you would lose like $10 million on every rocket. But Elon Musk didn't even, he just approached the industry as, let's make a rocket where the rocket can also land. And therefore, he advanced the industry, innovation through ignorance. Now, jumping back to when I started my podcast and I get to my 10th episode and I'm ready to call Danny Miranda. Chris is going to put me on the phone with him, and I decide not to call him because I want to innovate through ignorance. And I'll give you an example. Most people, when they start a podcast, the cover art they do is like graphic design. They kind of design this image with their face or whatever. But I wanted mine to be a Polaroid. If I had looked at a bunch of podcast art before, I don't know if I would come up with that. But I didn't. I just was like, what would I want? And so I just made a Polaroid. Since making that cover art for the podcast, I've had so many people tell me that they love the cover art. Another example, I don't have a studio because I don't have the money to create a studio and I travel a lot. So I was just like, frick it, I will film my podcast outside. And if I had looked to a bunch of other podcasts, I would have told myself, hey, I can't film my podcast outside. I'm going to have way worse audio than everyone else. No one else's podcast is outside. But since I started filming my podcast outside, since I wasn't worried about how other people did it and I just did what I could do, I've now innovated through ignorance. Simply by having a podcast outside, I'm differentiating myself from like 90% of creators because they film their podcasts inside. Again, none of this has anything to do with synchronicities, and I will get to that. So anyways, I don't end up calling Danny Miranda. I end up being like, I don't even want to know the way he does it because I just want to do it myself, and hopefully that will be the best way. Fast forward, I end up in New York City for Creator Camp, and I meet Anne Marie, who's like a hero of mine. I don't necessarily watch a bunch of her content, but I've always known who she is. She was one of the first ever, debatably the first ever YouTube vlogger. And so to meet her was such a big deal because not YouTube vlogger, college vlogger. I was a college vlogger and she's debatably the first ever college vlogger. And I got to meet her and that was just surreal because it was surreal, one, because she did my podcast art, which is kind of a crazy story from back then. I'd met her for like 20 minutes one time, and she was the girl who wrote the inspired on the Polaroid. But two, it was a big deal because she kind of created the college vlog industry. Here, go sit on the bed. My friend's over there. But here's the crazy part. We hit it off so well. We hit it off so well that we end up filming a podcast together. It becomes my longest podcast. You guys will see it in the future, and it's something I'm really proud of. Whoever's alarm, turn that off if you can. But here's the crazy thing. She is kind of dating or talking to Danny Miranda, the guy that I literally didn't get on the phone with. So I don't get on the phone with him, and then God or the universe just puts him back into my life. I mean, I'm going to say God because that's what I believe in. Just puts him back into my life. So I decide not to take this phone call with him at 10 episodes in. And then at 20 episodes in, where I'm at right now, I just get to straight up meet him. So that was like a crazy synchronicity. But then I have another crazy synchronicity. Jaden, come over here. You can just pop a squat on the bot.
I'm not going to do that. I'll pop a squat right here.
Okay. Jaden, this kid who's in New York City with me, I met him a month ago in a pizza shop in Los Angeles. And then we go on all these journeys together. We end up going to Joshua Tree. He introducing me to his best friends. I'm introducing him to my best friends. We become best friends. And through the most random event, my friend buys him a ticket to New York City at the same time I'm going to New York City. And we end up eating pizza in a pizza shop in New York City. And we're like, hey, when did we meet each other? 1 month ago to the day we met each other at a pizza shop in LA, and now we're in New York City at a pizza shop.
It was crazy.
What do you-
Unreal.
So I'm telling them about synchronicities. Have you
Synchronicity.
had any like absurd synchronicities?
Every part of life since taking the leap of faith for me moving to California.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's just been
I think it comes after you really like stop trying to do stuff yourself and you give it up to God.
that's what I feel like it is too. And like I guess another synchronicity is that like you kind of didn't have money and you let yourself just be taken. And I bet this month is the month you've traveled probably the most in your life, and it's probably the month you've been the most broke in your life. Is that fair?
That's a fair thing.
And that's crazy. It's because we associate like the ability to travel with our money. That's not even true. If you just let God work, you can just be all over the world, which is crazy.
That's true. I agree with this. I'm reading something right now in Matthew McConaughey's book.
Yeah.
Shout out Green Lights, Matthew McConaughey.
Best
yeah, it's a great book. There's something that says like the target doesn't, or you don't, do you know what I'm talking about?
No.
It's like the arrow doesn't get aimed towards the target, but instead the target like draws in the arrow. Yeah. So we have to be the target, like drawing in the arrow rather than trying to be this arrow, like, you know.
Dude, I think it's unreal. So like the synchronicity I had with him where I met him in a pizza shop in LA. We're now in a pizza shop in New York City. This podcaster that I looked up to, I was going to get on the phone with him. I decided not to. I meet him 10 days later in person. That was crazy. I'm trying to think of the other. I'll mention this. I'm about to go walk let me start here. The last crazy synchronicity is that I was filming a podcast with this kid, Luis. Luis, are you here? Oh yeah, come. Yes, Southern Luis. Southern Luis.
What's up?
What's up, y'all? Just do like a little squat here. You can sit on my lap, but Jaden was uncomfortable with the lap sitting. Oh, let's go. Okay, you're still in frame. I met this kid. We did a podcast, probably like 12 days ago at this point?
Less than 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago. While we're filming a podcast, some kid that I haven't talked to from high school, like 4 years ago from high school, walks by and he's wearing a full-on hiker's backpack, like waist straps, chest straps, and everything. And he stops, he calls out my name, and I'm confused. Like, why is this guy wearing such a big backpack? And like, we're just kind of in a nature trail filming a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, I'm going to walk the Camino de Santiago in Spain. And he's training for it. Now, I've never heard of the Camino de Santiago. I thought, wow, that's sick. You probably thought.
Yeah, the same thing.
It's kind of cool. Didn't even really know what it was. I end up going to New York City, and I have a couple friends that are about to leave to do the Camino de Santiago, and they say this like millionaire guy, Elliot Bisno, that I've always looked up to, I've read about him in books, is like sponsoring their trip, that he's sending them to walk it, which is kind of weird because this guy from my high school is doing it, and then I run into these two guys doing it, and Elliot, the guy I look up to, offers for a third guy to go walk the Camino de Santiago, and he is at the same event that I'm at in Creator Camp in New York City. And that guy decides that he has work and he can't do it and that he can't fill a role. And I'm like, well, I mean, if that opportunity is still open, I'd walk the Camino de Santiago. And so this millionaire, I don't like to refer to him as a millionaire. He's like a great entrepreneur founder. He's a hero that I've looked up to. Just offers to pay for me to go walk the Camino de Santiago. So within the span of 2 weeks, I film a podcast. Some kid from my high school walks by, tells me he's walking across the northern part of Spain. Then I meet two kids walking across the northern part of Spain. And then I get invited for free to go walk across the northern part of Spain. And all those synchronicities that I'm talking to you about have all happened within the last month. And that's just from like straight up going with the flow and like letting God take control of my life and not really having expectations. Luis.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have anything to say about synchronicities in the last month?
100%. In the last month of my life, I think at the time, maybe 6 weeks ago, I was in a rut and I wasn't really doing anything, wasn't hanging out with anybody, wasn't working towards my goals. And I was just in my apartment like 90% of the time. And when I finally decided to go out and do stuff and like you were saying, the flow, Like so many things have happened, have transpired like since making that decision to actually just do stuff, go out into the world and put my energy out into the world. Ended up meeting Chris like super spontaneously, like not expecting it, like a 368 tapped in his shoulder. We got to talking, and after that first interaction, so many things happened after that. Met him again in Los Angeles 2 weeks ago. The day that I met you, the day that I met Jaden.
Wait, let me clarify this just so they understand how crazy this story. So he decides to go out and he meets the founder of Creator Camp and taps on his shoulder. Then he's in LA 2 weeks later, and the founder of Creator Camp tells him to come do a podcast with me. So you meet me.
Right.
That's in San Diego, the furthest part away from the country. I happen to be going to New York City where you live. And now we stay in the same house, which is your house, for like a week.
Yeah.
And then you went on to go to the actual Creator Camp event and meet a bunch of your heroes.
Yeah, only because I hit Chris up when I was in California, like super randomly. I just sent him a message like, hey, Chris, I know nobody here. I know you're from SoCal and I have no plans. I just wanted to see if you're down for an adventure. He said he was super busy, but then he told me to get on the podcast with Ozzy. And then after that, met up for coffee, and then he finally offered if I wanted to attend the Career Camp event on Tuesday last week.
And so we came to New York City. We've been staying on his couch. Jaden come back in frame. Jaden, my friend who I met completely separate from him, we're both on his couch in New York City. And life just feels really unreal. And I got to give a shout out to Luis because he's opened up his house to us. He's gave us food. He's driven us everywhere, has not asked for money once from us. He's literally poured into our life so much. And I'm a firm believer, one, that happiness comes from giving rather than getting. And two, that you will be blessed if you give and you expect nothing. And this guy just gives to freaking everyone. So I hope that one day someone is watching this podcast and they feel like, damn, I want to go bless Luis because he really deserves it.
Oh, thank you guys. You guys are great guests.
Jaden's a great giver too, but we don't
have anything to give.
We give our time and love. We don't really have money in. We give our time and love. But yeah, that's it for the pod. Peace out.
Bye.